Hello, I'm Chris Cosgrove.
I'm Laura Carrol.
And I'm Jenna.
And today we are talking about a 2005 master's paper by Olson on manga and academic library collections, definitions, strategies, and bibliography for collecting Japanese comics.
First, we'll talk about the specific purpose of this paper. It seems that the goal of it was to create 3 resources to assist in the collection of development of manga. First would be the examination of the history and format of manga. Then it would be articulating the collection development strategies of bibliographers within Japanese studies. And finally, it would be to compose a bibliography to assist academic librarians in this process.
So taking a look at the methodology, the researcher primarily composed email interviews and did a deep analysis of existing scholarship on the evolution of manga. So it's important to note that this research is more exploratory and descriptive. It's not a traditional experimental study. Instead, Rob composes a bibliography and also looks at these interviews to see how exactly could you build this collection. And throughout the entire paper, whenever a source is introduced via the interviews the author conducted or bibliographic resources, the author weaves this information into a greater narrative and tries to create just a comprehensive picture of what a manga collection could be.
Yeah, exactly. So the major results of this paper is that it really justifies having a manga collection in an academic library, and the author does mention that the paper itself is just a starting point for developing the strategy.
So now that we've discussed the background and methodology of the paper, let's take a look at the research question itself and the problems addressed with it and the implications. The research question was, how do you develop a manga collection in an academic library? At the time it was written, there wasn't a lot of scholarly research on how to develop this sort of collection specifically in an academic library, where the primary focus of the collection isn't on user entertainment. And this was one of our biggest critiques of it. How does one build a blueprint or strategy for creating a collection when the needs for each library are different and often very specific? For example, one of the libraries discussed gave the criteria for having manga in their collection. A few instances are having comics created by famous authors, having comics reflecting Japanese society at the time they were written, and also having comics written by female authors. In this case, manga may have many different uses or purposes, and the primary focus is on the needs of the academic library itself, and each library needs it for a different reason.
Yeah, exactly. So the research is really important because it addresses these gaps in collection development. And as the author states, and as the reader can conclude, is that popular media is something that should be as rigorously collected as scholarly publications.
So given this exploratory research and the fact that it's really at its beginning when the paper was composed in 2005, we're going to take a look into some of the strengths and limitations of the work. So Kayla and Iliana, I'll hand it off to you.
I am Kayla Olson. I am a first-year master's student in library sciences.
Yes, and I'm Iliana Burgos. I'm also a first-year MSLS student. So they give us an extensive historical context for the creation and development of manga from even just from centuries ago to the more recent, the period that is particularly discussed in this paper is the post-World War II period, where you see a strong development of manga literature as a comics medium for those that did not have a lot of money, and for an opportunity to express just different societal feelings toward the government, toward direction and identity. And so you see this develop over time into what we, contemporarily understand it, or as rather understand it in the contemporary sense as being purely for entertainment and for this interesting exposure for non-Western audiences to Japanese culture. And so the author does dive into a lot of information about, of course, just not only Japanese language, which is used throughout the paper naturally because there's a lot of manga-related terms that you have to express in the original language. And in order to have Western audiences sort of appreciate and understand the depth that there's a difference between manga comics literature and perhaps how we understand comics literature as people that go to Avengers movies and
American comics and
yes, and having a lot of depth and complexity, and also a lot of cultural discourse, which is necessary for an academic study.
Yeah, definitely. It was really nice that for a Western audience, or even those that are unfamiliar with manga, they provided terms like katakana and hiragana, kanji, the different types of language that is used, especially if you are working with things in a different language than English. You want to say whether or not you're going to use romanization, so in not using the original characters, or are you going to use the original Japanese characters when you spell things in your paper? So that's very academic. The different manga genres, shonen, shoujo, reiritsu, like different types. So that was really helpful, I think. That perhaps they could have taken the parts 2 and 3, which has to do with format and characteristics of manga and how like actual comics are set up, and perhaps consolidated more with their history section, because then it gets a little long. Or they could have perhaps, I think, lengthened their analysis later to balance out, because they have a really good analysis later. So we have things like onomatopoeias that they mentioned, which is, while amazing and interesting, is not really central to this argument. It's more just, manga is interesting, but I think at this point, the consensus in 2005 is already, yes, it is interesting, says Scholar 1, 2, 3, and 4. Thick description, which is put out by Clifford Geertz, is really important, where you have context, where you lay it out, and they've done that for transparency, which is good. It just could be shortened a little bit, I think, or consolidated.
So in the method, there's not a sort of straight up method section to this paper. It's sort of intimated in the fact that she consulted different manga collections experts at different academic universities. And so, rather, 2 questions that she, the writer, seeks to answer are of collection development issues and also cataloging issues. And so there could have been a lot more discourse on that particular topic. But again, it's a little bit unclear as to how she really develops these ideas, aside from consulting these experts via email. And at the time of 2005, maybe there weren't a lot of resources at the time to reach out to. And she does have some wonderful citations and other papers that she's consulted. So we as a group, we were kind of trying to understand whether or not, or rather a more fleshed out methodology would have been beneficial in some sense, but maybe because it was sort of a new discussion, maybe there just weren't enough resources to really thoroughly develop that.
Like, even just thinking about it, we had thought about how she used the OCLC or WorldCat, which is great, in order to find what collections did have manga, which is a great way to start. And just we have to imagine that this is nearly 15 years ago, like the age of, like, what did the OCLC or WorldCat even look like 15 years ago? And so they did a good job seeking out these couple of scholars. I wish they would have perhaps fleshed out or explained for transparency, like in her emails, did she ask both scholars the same questions? Did she go in approaching them the same way? Note that. How much information did they say you could divulge, like, about their collection and all of that type of stuff? And obviously they gave some sort of permission. It's just for the sake of methodology and ethics, just to put it in the paper too, a little tip.
Thanks for watching our overview and analysis of Alice and Rob's master's paper, Manga in Academic Libraries. We all enjoy learning more about manga and library collections.
To create this video, we used an online animation tool called Powtoon. We also created avatars of ourselves using a Japanese avatar creator by Tumblr user 5i. Links to these tools are in the doobly-doo.